Reawakening is a fabulous film. There is one aspect that almost nearly ruined the entire film for me, and it's not a spoiler, so I will mention that in a moment, but in general, I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I do have quite a lot of thoughts, and a few of them are spoilers, so at the very, very end, I will give a spoiler warning and go into some spoiler detail, but for the most part, this will be spoiler-free. The film was released in 2024. It's directed and written by Virginia Gilbert, with a cast including Jared Harris, Juliet Stevenson, and Erin Doherty as John, Mary, and Clare. And when Clare was 14 years old, she disappeared, potentially ran away, and 10 years later, her parents Mary and John get quite a surprise when she turns up on the doorstep of the family home. Is it actually Clare? And it was a little dull to begin with. We needed some time to get to know the parents, to get to know the characters, but it did feel slow to begin with. But once Clare returned home, once we got to that point, it was almost perfect. And as I said, there is one aspect that I do think caused problems, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. The first scene where we meet Clare is so well executed. John and Mary have very different responses, and for me, John's reaction to pretty much everything in the entire film is how I imagine I would react in that scenario. Now, I have thankfully never been in that scenario, so I don't know that for certain, but I did have a lot of issues with how Mary responded to things, and I'll probably go into this more when I go into the spoiler section. And that's not me saying that Mary doesn't react in a way that's believable, because I don't think there is a specific way to react or behave when your potential daughter returns after having been missing for 10 years. So it's not that I don't think Mary's responses were believable, but it's that I had a hard time liking the character or agreeing with the way she responded, because for me, that's not how I would respond. I find John's responses much more believable, but it's not a criticism towards the film or the way Mary was written. In fact, it's probably a good thing that we're seeing different ways in which people respond to this. And as I said, I don't think there is a right or wrong way to respond. Well, that's not true. I do think Mary responds in the wrong way, but it's not that I don't think it's believable. I'll expand on that in a moment. And obviously the film is all about, is this Clare? And John does not instantly believe that this is Clare. He needs proof, which I am fully on board with. He is clearly frustrated, and he's actually quite angry at Clare as well. There are moments where he allows himself to believe that this is Clare, but he's angry at her because she hasn't said where she's been. He's just assuming that she ran away and she put her parents through hell, and he quite rightly is angry. And I feel like that's a very valid emotion, whereas we see none of that in Mary. And the contrast is so fascinating to watch. And again, it's really believable, but I don't necessarily agree with Mary's response to everything. I also don't think, I will be honest, that initial aspect was not the most realistic, as one of the first things I believe I would do is call the police. But then maybe not. I don't know. I just was surprised there was no police involvement immediately, especially as this had been a high-profile case, of course, and it had been the 10-year anniversary, so there were more eyes on the case recently. But maybe that aspect wouldn't have been that realistic. But again, I can only judge it from what I think I would do in that situation. Let's hope I never have to find out. And once Clare arrives, as I said, it was a little bit slow up until that point. But once she arrives, it is amazing. We get just little bits of information over time. It is so unpredictable, which I absolutely love. The only thing I really, really hated, and I mean, had the narrative not been as strong as it is, I probably would have turned it off. Generally, it has a creative use of sound, but it also frequently uses this really horrible, squeaky, high-pitched sound, and I absolutely detest it. It happens whenever the character has a flashback or they see something that triggers a memory. And honestly, the editing on screen in that moment is creative. It's well done. We don't also need the sound to tell us they're experiencing a memory or a flashback. And the sound is insufferable. It is disgusting. It is horrible. And as I said, it is so bad that had the narrative not been so strong, I might not have made it through the film. And that's my only real criticism here. It is horrendous, it is disgusting to listen to, and it is unnecessary as well. Maybe once or twice, okay, I could deal with it, but it is really frequent. Thankfully, after the first time it happens, it's usually in short bursts, so it's frequent, but it's brief when it does happen. But it was really, really bad. Other than that, the technical aspects are all good. We have good camera work, creative editing. The screechy sound ruined what could have been a perfect film, but other than that, it is really, really moving and very, very emotional at times, as one can imagine. There are a lot of emotions in this, and I was hooked. I was desperate to know what was happening, and I thoroughly enjoyed the story. I think the character responses were really fascinating, believable, but sometimes frustrating, and I thoroughly recommend it. And from now, there will be big, big spoilers, as I want to share some thoughts on what we learn towards the end of the film. So these are huge spoilers. I'm about to explain what happens, but please watch the film, and then I'd love to know what you think of it. So spoilers from now. So we do learn that this girl isn't Clare. And she said that actually she doesn't know what happened to Clare. And I don't like that. Now, I only didn't like it for a couple of minutes because of something that happens soon after. But I don't like the fact that she said she didn't know what happened to Clare, because what she's then gone and done is wormed her way into this family. I don't think she did it maliciously. I think she did it out of desperation. But she's now posing as their daughter. And quite frankly, the parents are treating her as her daughter. But because she doesn't know what happened to Clare, Clare could still be out there. Clare could turn up at any moment. And Clare will see her parents having basically replaced her with somebody who obviously looks enough like her that they believed that it was her. So I really didn't like that of this girl, because Clare could turn up at any moment and see that her parents had seemingly replaced her. So I didn't love that, but that opinion kind of changes or becomes invalid in a moment, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But it definitely would have made more sense if this girl knew that Clare was dead. And that's why she was able to go to the family and pretend to be Clare, because she knew there was no chance that Clare would turn up. And also that would allow the parents to grieve for Clare while also taking in this young girl and caring for her in the way that she clearly needs. So it could have worked out much more accurately in that moment. This is based purely on this girl's actions. And then we find out that actually Clare isn't alive. And this was done quite cleverly, because John is asked to look over some photographs of items that belonged to the body of somebody they've found. This wasn't very well explained, so if you don't really pay attention to true crime, and you don't really necessarily immediately realise that these are photos of items they have found on a person, that might not have been immediately clear, but certainly that is the case here. They photograph items to help with identification, because obviously they're not going to show people photographs of the deceased in most cases. And there's a necklace with the letter C on it, and Clare is clearly dead. It's heavily implied. It could be a huge coincidence. Some other girl with the same necklace could be dead, absolutely, but it's heavily implied that this is the case, that's Clare's necklace and she's no longer around. And then at the very, very end, John goes back to the family home and he sees his wife with the fake Clare. And I think in that moment, he allows himself to accept that caring for this girl would be okay, because the real Clare is no longer around. And that, I think, is okay. But the bit that I find disgusting, and I still, to the very end of the film, found this disgusting, is that Mary didn't know her daughter had died. But she was still willing to take in the fake Clare and pretend that the fake Clare is Clare, receiving cards with mum on them for Mother's Day, as we see, or was it her birthday? I can't remember. It was her birthday, because they sang happy birthday to her. And receiving these cards, calling her mum, allowing her to be called mum by the fake Clare, while again, because Mary doesn't know Clare is dead, as is heavily implied, Clare could turn up on the doorstep at any moment. And again, I'm not saying it's incorrect. I'm not saying that that's not how somebody in Mary's position would respond to the situation, because I feel like it's an exceptionally bizarre, ridiculous, horrendous situation that nobody ever wants to find themselves in. So it's not that Mary's actions are unbelievable. She may well react that way in real life, but I don't like it. And if I were Clare, and if I were alive, and if I decided after a decade I needed to go home, I needed to explain what happened, and my parents had basically adopted a young girl who resembled me and was allowing them to call them her parents, I'd just turn around and walk away. I mean, I don't know if I actually would, but Mary's response is just so horrific and horrendous, and I hate it. But again, maybe it's believable. Whereas John's much more realistic. He didn't allow himself to think of this girl as somebody he could care for as a daughter until he learned that his own daughter was no more. And if they can help somebody else in need, fantastic. But as I said earlier on, if this girl knew that Clare was dead, and she explained this, the parents could grieve for their daughter while also caring for the fake Clare in her place, knowing that the real Clare could never turn up and be hurt by that. So there are some frustrating actions, but as I said, it's not that I think they're unrealistic or badly written, because who knows how anybody would respond in that kind of scenario until you are in that position. But it doesn't mean that I agree with it. John, more so, yes. Mary, pretty much throughout the entire thing, I hated the way she responded to things. I hated her actions. I hated her attitude. But also, she's a woman who's been grieving for 10 years, so I don't blame her. But I don't like it. But the film itself, the horrible, nasty, high-pitched sound aside, is pretty fantastic. Slow to begin with, but once it got going, it was so gripping and compelling and engaging, a brilliant character study. The noise aside, it was almost perfect. And of course, I'm very happy to recommend it.